Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Darling. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Bhajayana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Bhajayana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari.
Thank you so much, Ramapati Prabhu. Jayam Vishnu Pad Paramhamsa Pravikacharya Astuta Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Charya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnu Pad Paramhamsa Pravikacharya Astuta Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se ko Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Prabhupada. Narayanam namaskritya Naram chaiva narottamam Devim saraswatim vyasam Tato jayam udirayet Nastaprai subhadreshu Nityam bhagavata sevaya Bhagavat uttam ashloke Bhaktir bhavati nashtaki Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. So this morning we'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 11, Text 26. Asikta Margam Gandodai Karinam Madashikarai Swaminam Praptam Alokya Matam Va Sutaram Iva Asikta Margam Gandodai Karinam Madashikarai Swaminam Praptam Alokya Matam Va Sutaram Iva Asikta Margam Gandodai Karinam Madashikarai Swaminam Praptam Alokya Matam Va Sutaram Iva Asikta Margam Gandodai Karinam Madashikarai Swaminam Praptam Alokya Matam Va Sutaram Iva Shankarshan Das, would you like to chant? Asikta Margam Gandodai Karinam Madashikarai Swaminam Praptam Alokya Matamba Sutaramiva. Anyone online would like to chant?
Asikta margam gandhodai
Asikta margam gandhodai
Harinamada shikarai Swaminam praptam alokya
Swaminam paptam alokya
Padam vasutarameva
Matamba Sutaramiva. Synonyms. Asikta margam. The streets were sprinkled. Gandha udai, with perfumed water. Karinam, of elephants. Madashikarai, with particles of perfumed liquor. Swaminam, the master or proprietor. Praptam, present. Alokya, seen personally. Matam, very opulent. Va, either. Sutaram, highly. Eva, as if. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. During the reign of Lord Rāmacandra, the streets of the capital, Ayodhyā, were sprinkled with perfumed water and drops of perfumed liquor thrown about by elephants from their trunks. When the elephants saw the Lord personally supervising the affairs of the city in such opulence, they appreciated this opulence very much. Purport. We have simply heard about the opulence of Ram Rajya during the reign of Lord Rāmacandra. Now here is one example of the opulence of the Lord's kingdom. The streets of Ayodhyā were not only cleaned, but also sprinkled with perfumed water and drops of perfumed liquor, which were distributed by elephants through their trunks. There was no need of sprinkling machines, for the elephant has a natural ability to suck water through its trunk and again throw it out in a shower. We can understand the opulence of the city from this one example. It was actually sprinkled with perfumed water. Moreover, the citizens had the opportunity to see the Lord personally, supervising the affairs of the state. He was not a sleeping monarch, as we can understand from his activities in sending his brothers to see to affairs outside the capital and punish anyone who did not obey the emperor's orders. This is called Digvijay. The citizens were all given facilities for peaceful life, and they were also qualified with appropriate attributes, according to Varnashram. As we have seen from the previous chapter, Varnashram Guna Vitaha. The citizens were trained according to the Varnashram system. A class of men were Brahmanas, a class of men were Kshatriyas, a class were Vaishyas, and a class were Shudras. Without this scientific division, there can be no question of good citizenship. The king, being magnanimous and perfect in his duty, performed many sacrifices and treated the citizens as his sons. And the citizens, being trained in the Varnashram system, were obedient and perfectly ordered. The entire monarchy was so opulent and peaceful that the government was even able to sprinkle the street with perfumed water. What to speak of other management? Since the city was sprinkled with perfumed water, we can simply imagine how opulent it was in other respects. Why should the citizens not have felt happy during the reign of Lord Ramachandra? Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Miltam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadam Mayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka and Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanusita Devi Pranamami Hare Priya Vancha Kalpatriyubhischa Kripa Sindhibhevacha Patitanam Pavinebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this verse, we get a glimpse of how wonderful the kingdom of Lord Ramacandra was. Everything was cleaned and everything smelled wonderful. When Srila Prabhupada landed in New York City, what was his impression? It smelled like dog stool. So it's the opposite of this Kali Yuga, or this materialistic society. In Queen Kunti's prayers, she said, "O Gadadhar, Krishna, our kingdom is now being marked by the impressions of your feet, and therefore appears beautiful. But when you leave, it will no longer be so." Srila Prabhupada used the example of the number 0. 0, it has no value. But when you put a 1 next to it, it becomes very beautiful. It becomes 10, 100, 1,000, 100,000, a million, 1 billion. So that 1 represents Krishna. Without Krishna in the center of our lives, what is the value of living? Srila Prabhupada, he also made this wonderful connection. It's a Chanaka Pandit shloka. He said that everything looks beautiful when it's related to something in a very intimate way. And he gives 4 examples. Sharvari Bhushanam Chandra. At night, it's very beautiful. But when the moon is there, a full moon, it's more beautiful. When I was in Italy, in Milan, I would wake up the regular time, 2 o'clock, and I would chant going back and forth next to the temple room. And the bright moon was there. It looked very beautiful. And I remember this verse. So the sky is very vast at night. But on a full moon night, when the moon is there and the stars are shining brilliantly, it looks more beautiful, isn't it? And then, Narinam Bhushanam Pati. Srila Prabhupada says this, so I'm going to repeat it as a brahmachari. He says that a girl looks very beautiful, naturally. But when she has a husband, she looks more beautiful. So that's one comparison. And then, Prithivi Bhushanam Raja. That the state looks very beautiful with a good government, a good king or a good president. Then everyone is happy. Everything is going on nicely. But in Kali Yuga, we see the opposite. So many citizens are dissatisfied. They're not happy with the government. As I mentioned earlier, in Myanmar, in Burma, there are 3 civil wars going on right now. And you can't blame them. The so-called rebels, they're citizens. And they're fed up with the government in Burma. They're being oppressed. They're being exploited. So these citizens, they've taken things in a matter in their own hands. And they're rebelling against the government. But when the president, when the king is a very good leader, then the people are naturally happy. And there's no such thing as protests or wars going on. And then Vidya Sharvasya Bhushanam. That a person may be very ugly, but if he has knowledge, then it's very beautiful. So that gives hope to some of us. Just like there's a comparison between a king and a learned person. A king is respected only within his kingdom, maybe to his opulence or his influence, or maybe the obligation of the people. But a learned person is respected everywhere he goes. So Srila Prabhupada said there's no comparison between a king and a learned person. A learned person is respected everywhere he goes, because everyone needs to receive knowledge. So similarly, everything will look very beautiful when Krishna is there, when Krishna is in our lives. Kunti Devi, she was thinking, when Krishna is absent, our kingdom will not be very beautiful. And we Pandavas, our kingdom, Hastinapur, it looks very beautiful because Krishna is here. Srila Prabhupada, he says that in Philadelphia, one lady was inquiring, "Are you Americans?" And then she said, "You guys are very bright face," the term bright face. Because at the present moment in this country and many other countries, all young generations mostly, they're confused, they're hopeless, they're morose. So when they saw the devotees chanting, smiling, they couldn't believe that they were Americans. So they were bright-faced. I was distributing books in Balboa Park, and there was a man, he came to my table, he said, "Can I take a picture of you?" And I told him, "I'll break your camera." So he said, no, I want to take a picture of you. So I asked him why. He said, "I've been to the Christian booth, and they're very angry. They always want to argue with you. And I've been to the Muslim tent also, and I was just walking by, and then they said something very nasty to me. But you look very peaceful. You look happy." So he said, what do you have to give?" So I was explaining the books and how these books, they can create a revolution in one's heart. It can get rid of all of the unwanted qualities within the heart. And he became very curious. So I asked him, "I'll let you take a picture if you take a book." So he agreed. So Srila Prabhupada, he explained that the kings in Vedic culture, they had an open assembly, an open audience with the citizens for any complaints. And then he said, there's no such thing as you make an appeal to the court, and then 6 months later you'll see the judge, So Lord Rāmacandra, similarly, he had an open audience with the citizens for any complaints. There was one Brahmana, and he had a complaint to Lord Ram that my son died under your jurisdiction, because this is unnatural for the son to die before the father. So Srila Prabhupada explained, just see how wonderful the Vedic culture was, that it was very rare to see something like this, the death of your son. Srila Prabhupada, he says that the government must be strict. And he used the example of Kashmir. He said maybe 50 years ago, when a person was caught stealing, it was proven he was stealing, they would cut off his hands. And they said from this one act, it can prevent millions of thieves from stealing. So Srila Prabhupada said the government must be strict. And then there's no discrepancies in the people's lives. In the Varaha Purana, it says that demons take advantage of the age of Kali to appear in Brahmin families. And then Shukadev Goswami says that the kings will mostly be thieves. And who can argue with that? I meet a lot of people, and they're stressed out because of work. They're saying, I have so much pressure on me to finish this work, and if not, I could get fired. So the companies, the government, they no longer care for the citizens. Their only concern is themselves. Srila Prabhupada, in a funny way, he says that the monarch is not a sleeping monarch. So formerly the king, or the head of the state, he would first go out in the field, in the battle, in the fight. And in the battle of Kurukshetra, on both sides, all of the commanders, they were there. Dronacharya, Bhishma Dev, even Duryodhana, he was there. So the head of the state, they were there to lead the army. They weren't sitting behind the White House, sending all the troops to die while he's there. No, a real Kshatriya, he fights in accordance to, it's interesting because Srila Prabhupada, he says that the warriors, the Kshatriyas, they have to fight for the right cause, meaning it has to be between dharma and adharma. It's not like what you see today where it's fighting over oil and land. But the people, the soldiers that were fighting, at the end, they either had two options. If they won, they could enjoy the kingdom. And if they didn't make it, but it was based on the right cause, they would ascend to the heavenly planets. So even Krishna was telling this to Arjuna, that you either win and you attain this kingdom, or you go to the heavenly planets. So for a real Kshatriya fighting for a noble cause, there is no negative effect. Srila Prabhupada, he says that in India there was training, and for a very long time there was no difficulty in recruiting soldiers. But in the US, nobody wants to fight, isn't it? His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami, he was concerned about the draft, getting drafted into the military. But in India, they were trained to be soldiers. Srila Prabhupada, he mentions Nepal. They're a population of Kshatriyas. And similarly, the Sikhs and the Jatas, they were classes of Kshatriyas. And they were always looking forward for to fight. So there's a necessity to train the mass of people in this Varnashram system. There's people that are Srila Prabhupada, he says, or he quotes, he says, Janmana Jayate Shudra. And in this Kali Yuga, everyone is born as a Shudra. And he explains that just like an innocent child from birth is ignorant, but he can be trained, isn't it? So although we're born as Shudras, we can be trained to become Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas. Srila Prabhupada says this is a very scientific division, that one class is the administrative, one class is the intelligent class of people, and then there's people that are the general laborers. But the fourth class of men, they don't require any training, the Shudras, the labor class. And Shudra means no samskara, there's no training. So everyone is accepted as Shudra by birth in Kali Yuga. But by undergoing the purificatory process or the ceremony, one can be, by a bona fide spiritual master, one can become trained to be a Brahmana. Srila Prabhupada says this Hare Krishna movement is meant for training Brahmanas, not for Kshatriyas. So Krishna consciousness, we're meant to train the people through our examples. Srila Prabhupada was one pure devotee that taught by example. He taught how to deal with people. He taught how to divide. In Kali Yuga, everyone has a very strong opinion about being treated differently. Everyone wants to be treated equally, but that's not the case. Everyone has their own nature. Everyone has their own inclinations. There's a really nice example. There was one elephant in the jungle, and it wanted to compete in the Olympics. But it wanted to compete in a race, who is the fastest. And it raced against a cheetah, it raced against a rabbit. So did the elephant have a chance in the race? No. But if the elephant decided to try out for the strongest, then he could have won. So similarly, people have a very distorted idea of reality. Their expectations are very high. So we cannot accept that everyone's the same. Naturally, there's people that are intellectuals. There are people that are naturally have a fighting spirit. Actually, Kshatriya's business is to protect, and the Vaishya's business is to protect cows, to produce grains and vegetables. Srila Prabhupada, he says you cannot live off of factories, bolts and nuts. So Vaishyas, or the mercantile class, the farmers, their occupation is very important for human society. We live off of grains, not from factories. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions that a person is qualified by his guna and karma, by his quality and his type of work. It's not by his janma or his birth. Srila Prabhupada, he says that just like a family of lawyers or a doctor, their son has a good advantage for them to be trained as doctors, engineers, and so on. But the child, although he has a good advantage point, it doesn't make him a lawyer or a doctor right away. He needs to practice, he needs to be qualified. So similarly, there's so many people in India, that's why so many people have problems with this caste system, that they took advantage of this, I'm a Brahmana, right? And then they exploit the other classes, although they're not even qualified to. There's an example of one gentleman here. He was gonna, so if I'm getting the story right, his son decided to join the ashram. And he said, if you don't bring my son back, I'm going to curse you. And he took hold of his Brahmin thread. And then in the process of doing that, cigarettes fell out of his pocket. So that's not a Brahmana. A Brahmana is clean, truthful, simple, knowledgeable in Shastra. So Lord Rāmacandra, he appeared in this world to educate and to place ideal examples of a king, how to rule a kingdom, how to have a good government, Ram Raja. And everyone was happy when the king is a very wonderful leader. So one of the duties of a Kshatriya is to see that the citizens are being educated spiritually. That was the duty of a Kshatriya. It's not just to protect them, but also to educate them spiritually. That's the duty of a king, to make sure that they're advancing in their spiritual life. One example that I can think of is in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The personification of Kali, Parikshit Maharaj, he was going on tour. He was touring his kingdom. And then he saw the personification of Kali. He was beating the legs of a cow and a bull, and says that the cow and the bull were so afraid that they were shaking and they were urinating. So right away, Parikshit Maharaj took hold of this rogue in the guise of a royal dress as a king, and said, "Who are you, and how dare you do this sinful activity in my kingdom?" So the Kshatriya, the king, the leader, must be very strict. And Parikshit Maharaj, he was going to kill Kali, but Kali, he protested. He said, I need places to go. So Parikshit Maharaj said, you can go where there are 4 things. There's brothels, prostitute houses, liquor houses, where there's gambling, and where there's meat eating. And Kali, he knew that the whole world was under Parikshit Maharaj's rulership, and he understood there was no such place on the earth. So he said, so he was begging, give me one more place. So then Parikshit Maharaj said, you can go where there's gold. Because where there's gold, there's falsity, there's lust, it's the beginning of sinful life. So Kali, he folded his hands, and then he went where these 5 places are. where there's gambling, meat eating, intoxication, and illicit relationships. Now there's Kali Yuga. Every corner there's a liquor store, isn't it? So the leaders of today, they should read Srimad Bhagavatam. They should understand what are the duties of a leader, of a monarch. Okay, it's 8:25. I'll open up for questions or comments. Dr. Eric, you have a question or comment? Sure.
Yeah, it's on. Okay. So, I know you said about stealing, right? But I see like at a point in life, people should have a certain access towards stuff, right? If you don't give someone certain like access or individuals like access, stuff could get out of hand, right? Especially knowing how they come from. For example, me in Arizona, I went through a phase a couple years ago where I was just getting blocked out, right? Like authority will come up to me and tell me I couldn't do certain stuff, right? So then it got to my head, and I was like, okay, well, if they want to play, I'm gonna show them that there's more people, you know, in my life, and there's more than power. Like there's godly power, and lots of people, they came up to me and they were like, what are you doing? Like how do you find lots of bathrooms and stuff? I was like, I use godly forces, like God. And they would look at me and they would be like, what? Like, what are you doing? You know, like I guess it comes to a point like some people saying, is God even real? Right? And to me, I say like, we learn as we go, maybe, in this life, right? We're learning as we're going. And yeah, that's what I have to say. Is just, it was just there, and I just had to say it.
Yeah, everything begins with a good government or a good leader. Then he will provide for the people. Like it says here, Lord Rāmacandra treated his citizens like his own sons. But the president, they don't see that like that. But see, in the West, it's the opposite of the Vedic culture, you know. Everyone has a problem with, anyway, that's the whole thing. But in the West, Srila Prabhupada said everything is topsy-turvy, you know. Intermingling with men and women, this and that. I was just rereading the 12th canto of Bhagavatam, and it was describing the processes of Kali Yuga, or the descriptions, that men and women will live together based on physical attraction. And a person will be known to be beautiful by his hair, his hairstyle. And then a person is considered to be educated based on his power or wealth. So many things. So yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. But Krishna within the heart gives intelligence. Dravida Prabhu?
That thing about the hair, you know, people think, Prabhupada, he would always give the example, he would quote this phrase from the 12th canto, because there's a whole list there of qualities of the Kali Yuga. Lavanya Kesha Dharanam. And he probably would always say, and you know, I read that, and when I came, I found it was true, that people are, you know, thinking they're beautiful by their hair. But what really he meant is that men would feel that when the long hair, you know, there was a time when people had long hair, like men, you know, and that was the style, you know. And I went through that period, but my hair never got farther than down to here. But some, you got, you know, just like ladies' hair.
Yeah.
So that's what Prabhupada is meaning by that, is that because it's just it was I don't think it's very common so much anymore. You know, there came who were those guys? They would shave their head. You know, the bikers. You know, something, I forget what they called them. You know, so that became the style after a while. And then you had a little, like a tomahawk thing. It was a whole bunch of stuff. But for a while there in the 60s, you just let your hair grow, you know, and oh, yes, very nice.
There was one person I was speaking to in Balboa Park, and said, yeah, I'm trying to live like a monk. I'm trying to be renounced. And I said, what's up with your hair? I said, you have long hair. I said, you're attached to your hair? And they admitted, said, yeah, I'm attached to my hair. I said, how can you be renounced if you're attached to something silly like your hair? He said, good point. So then a few days I met him again, and his hair was shorter. You know, it wasn't long, but it was short, so he cut it. You know, so yeah, I should have told him. Yeah, it's interesting because you know, who cares about me? But I remember when I was trying to look for truth, or the absolute truth, I let my hair and my beard grow. You know, and I was thinking, unless I find the truth, I'm not going to cut my hair. You know, so when I read Srila Prabhupada's books, I was convinced, and then I started shaving my beard and all that. You have something to say, Bhakti Chad?
Sure. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I have a question for Suresh Prabhu and you. So, so are you gonna go tell your wife tonight that she looks more beautiful with the husband? Hare Krishna. The other thing I was thinking about Govardhana Prabhu was in Kali Yuga, the military situation and training and so forth. To be a soldier, you know, someone commits their life usually to just training to go to war. And what do you think about that creating a propensity for people to actually want to go to war, to, you know, because they've, you know, spent all this time. Also, there's, you know, tons of money that's been put into the military, and, you know, the president wants to use the military. Then, you know, it creates kind of a scenario where it's used haphazardly, it seems like. And I also like the idea that back in the Vedas, or back in the day, the Kshatriyas used to do philanthropic things along with training to fight. I think that would probably be something good these days to do along with, you know, the military training. Now, what do you think about all that, Hare Krishna?
I think that should be the standard. And also, like I mentioned, Srila Prabhupada said people need to fight for the right war, you know. But if you're training people on the basis of go to this country, you know, invade, conquer, it's not the right measure of what is the duty of soldiers. Srila Prabhupada says now if people are fighting because of religious wars, but in actuality, they have a misunderstanding. Because they're fighting, they want to get this piece of land, but a devotee knows that this land actually belongs to Krishna, to God. So on that basis, everyone's fighting. You know, Prabhupada would say nationalism, you know. So I think it would be nice if the government would be trained when to go to war. You know, why should you go to war, and what are the reasons and the benefits of going to war? It's not just conquering this country or that country, you know. The people, they're not going to go to heaven based on that if they die on the battlefield.
Yeah. One more thing. I used to say this. I used to say, That's the one way that land has been lost, because if you put 1 million soldiers to my left, right, and 1 million soldiers to my right, and you tell them those millions to my right to sign the paper that we're going to war against the millions to my left, and then I tell the millions to my left that they want to go to war, and these guys are all action. You know, like, you know how long is it going to take to sign the fucking paper for lots of people to... Yeah, okay, but anyways, besides that, I guess the war one, I don't think like there should start a war anytime soon. I don't see it like that, but yeah. But yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you for your time and attention. Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.